A long time ago, in a village, there was a very wealthy old couple. Their son and daughter grew up well and worked in important government jobs, so they never lacked for anything. One day, a guest came to visit the elderly couple. While sharing drinks with the guest, the old woman, who had gotten a bit tipsy, started talking about her younger days.
You both are quite old, but you still seem so close and in love. Even someone as young as me finds it admirable.
Ha ha! Do I seem that way? But I had quite the story in my younger days. You know, when I was young, I fell in love with a monk and even did something rather embarrassing.
What are you saying, woman? Aren't you ashamed to speak like this?
What's there to be ashamed of at this age? There's nothing. I can't say now.
Hearing that makes me even more curious about your story.
Ha ha! Curious, are you? Then let me tell you. I was originally the daughter of a noble family. My parents died when I was young, so I grew up at my uncle's house. But it seemed like my uncle didn't like me much. He married me off to an old eunuch. When I was still a child, back in the early days of the kingdom, eunuchs weren't allowed to get married. But later on, those rules weren't enforced, so some eunuchs even had wives and, in rare cases, concubines. Anyway, after I got married to the eunuch, we lived together in the same room. On our wedding night, he just touched me a little and kissed me. Then he fell asleep. At the time, I was still young and didn't know anything about those kinds of things. So I thought just sleeping next to each other was what married life was all about. But as the years passed, I started to understand more about life, and I became lonely and full of regret. At night, I couldn't sleep because my mind was racing with thoughts. Many times, I cried out of frustration and sadness. What's the point of wearing fancy clothes and eating white rice when my heart was so empty? I'd rather sleep under a thatched roof with a rough blanket and eat simple meals as long as I could share my life with a real man. Even though I was married, I was still like a maiden. I often thought maybe I should run away with another man, share love, and live happily, but there were strict rules. If I got caught, I'd likely lose my life, so I was too scared to act on those thoughts. I endured for several more years until, eventually, I came up with a plan. I secretly saved some of my jewelry and money, wrapped it up in a bundle, and prepared to leave. Then, when the eunuch was on duty at the palace, I sneaked out at dawn. I climbed over the wall and headed south. I had never left the house before, so I didn't know any shortcuts. I just followed the main road. As I walked, I thought deeply about my situation. Phew, I've run away, but now what do I do? Even though I was still like a maiden who would want to marry me. I definitely didn't want to become someone's concubine and deal with the jealousy of the wife. So, who should I marry? As a married woman, I didn't know what to do. Then I made up my mind, if I saw a young man who wasn't married, I'd just choose him and make him my partner. While thinking about this, I crossed a hill and heard footsteps coming from afar. Oh no! Out of all the men, it had to be a monk. But then I thought, no! I've come this far. I ran away from the eunuch's house, so I can't give up now. I looked closer at the monk. He was strong and manly, and he looked about my age. I thought, this must be fate, so I followed him.
Monk, where are you going?
I asked.
I'm heading to a temple in Cheongju.
He replied.
Do you have any family?
I only have my mother.
I kept talking to him as I followed, but it seemed like he didn't like it because he tried to walk faster to avoid me. But I also hurried and followed him closely. When he walked slowly, I walked slowly. When he ran, I ran as fast as I could. After a while, we reached Cheongju, and he took a rest in some tall grass. So I sat down next to him. I thought to myself, if he goes into the temple, I'll lose him forever. If I don't act now, all my efforts will be wasted. I have to marry him no matter what. So I moved closer to him, and without thinking, hugged him around the waist.
Why are you doing this? Please, let me go.
He said.
I've been wanting to talk to you, but since you keep avoiding me, I had no choice.
I replied.
Fine, let me go, and then we can talk.
Once I let him go, we finally had a chance to talk.
Do you live in Cheongju?
I asked.
Is your mother living alone?
Yes, my mother is alone.
Oh, no! How can you let your old mother live alone like that?
At least, since I became a monk, that was one less mouth to feed.
Oh my! So, you didn't become a monk to dedicate yourself to Buddhism, but just to survive because you were too poor to feed yourself.
He lowered his head and cried like a child when he heard my words. I wiped away his tears and said,
Poor thing. Come, let's go somewhere more private.
I led him into the woods and held him close. Finally, it seemed he had some feelings for me. He started trembling and hugged me tightly. It was like he became a different person.
We've shared our love, so now you belong to this world. Let's not go back to the temple. Come with me to your home.
And so, we walked together to his house. When we arrived, an old woman who looked tired asked who I was. I stepped forward and greeted her.
Mother, we have become husband and wife today.
Please accept my beau as your daughter-in-law.
What? Who is this sly woman? If the head monk finds out, how will we repay the money for raising my son in the temple for 10 years?
The old woman was shocked and stomped her feet, hitting her chest in frustration. So I took out my bundle of treasures and showed her.
Mother, I have plenty of money. We won't have any problems living, and if the head monk comes, I will handle everything.
The mother's face brightened when she saw the valuable items, and she invited me inside. That's how I became the monk's wife. That night, we shared our love, and the monk enjoyed it so much that we didn't even notice time passing. We laughed so much our sides hurt. The next day, I sold a ring and gave the money to my husband to buy fine clothes. When he changed out of his monk's robes and into his new clothes, he looked like a completely different man, a handsome one at that. We lived together happily like a proper couple, and life was wonderful. But one day, the head monk showed up at our house, yelling at my mother-in-law. I watched him with disgust. He was ugly, and his voice was irritating.
How dare you take your son back from the temple? Pay back the debt for the 10 years. We spent feeding and clothing. Him, or you'll be in big trouble.
The head monk was shouting and making a scene, and my mother-in-law was shaking, with fear, unable to say a word. So I ran out from the kitchen, grabbed the monk by the ear, and slapped him across the face.
You disrespectful monk! How dare you act like this? If you don't leave immediately, I'll break your skull.
I kept slapping him until he ran off, holding his cheek and screaming. He was so scared that he never came back. Years passed, and we moved to this village. We've been together for over 50 years. We raised children, who are now all successful. Our barn is full of rice, and we have lots of horses and cows. I guess my husband was truly blessed with good fortune.
That lucky monk is none other than me.